What I want to go over at this time, though, is what are the things we discovered as we were putting the metadata together for the metasheet. This is fairly common, actually, when you start to formally document metadata around data. You start to find things that you probably didn't even know were there. So we do maintain a little log of all the things we do around these files, along with the time that takes for each of these things. So we want to know at the end of the day how much time we spent repackaging and wrangling all this data set. And we're going to go through some of these notes. The biggest issue we found, and it's not particularly an easy one to solve, so we're not going to solve it right away. We'll solve it in the database and even after this video is done. Is that some of the variables in there seems to use different codes for a different meaning for the same codes. There were 3 variables that for some odd reason add some duplicate codes. And so when we pull all these things together from the layout file, we noticed that this variable, for example, which is a provider category subtype, at a code 01 for the CLA 88 laboratory, but there was also a code 01 for short term and a code 01 for 18 only. So we said, okay, that's kind of odd. We're trying to figure out where this was coming from. And what we discovered is if you actually look at the layout file for the other files, it's not a single layout. There are actually 18 different layouts in there. And the trick is, you see there's something called page 1 here. If you do a text search on page 1 and do find all of them, I'm going to have to resize this window here. You're going to notice that there's actually 18 different page 1 in there. And like, that was kind of a trigger as to what's going on here. And if you go to this page 1, you're going to see that this applies to hospital category equals 01. Now, if you look at another page 1, you're going to find that it applies to skilled nursing facility. And if you go to another one, you're going to find that it applies now to, oh, sorry, that's still skilled nursing facility. Let me pick another random one. You're going to find that it's a category 0. So depending on the category of the provider here, these codes can change, and it's usually fine if they're different files. But in general, if you have a classification that is shared across different files, you want these things not to have unique codes and meanings. And so the problem is that what basically we figure out is this other layout is really a stack of 18 different files that happen to share the same variable names. But some of these variables have variations. So if you stack all these files into a single data set, it's in a single table, you're going to have conflict, because these codes here that are duplicate codes, if you see a code 01 in there, it really depends on the category. And it's possible that, for certain categories, 01 will be short term, for another one will be home and agency. So the only way to do that, this is a coding error or a coding problem. It probably happens because these files are likely produced separately and simply stacked together for the purpose of publication here. The only way to deal with this properly is to create a new code which combines both the category and the subcode. For example, let's say if this CLA 88 lab will belong to category 01, we should create a new variable that is, for example, 0101. And this would become maybe, let's say, 0201 for category 02 subtype 01. No, we're not going to do that work now, simply because it would be too much for the purpose of this video. But it's a fixable problem down the road. The other way to deal with this would be to publish these files, our 18 different data products. But it's still not really good, because if you do want to compare these subtypes at some point, it's good to have them in different categories. And the same applies to 2 or 3 other variables. This accreditation type has the same problem. See, we have duplicate codes in general. So at this point, we're just not coding these variables, and we'll discuss internally how we can address this down the road for further publication. The rest of the work was more or less without too many surprises. We found a service code 4 for some of the pharmaceutical variables, radiology, which seems to be a duplicate of 0. So we have code 0 for not provider and 4 for not provider. Again, we'll investigate that probably in the database once we have the data in there. Maybe there is no code 4 being used at all, so we don't know yet. There's 2 or 3 missing classifications. They need to be added to the meta sheet. We again will do that a little bit down the road. We just wanted to move forward here. And the rest was mainly merging code lists. For example, the service code is shared by all these variables here. So it's essentially a single classification. All these variables were sharing code lists. So it was just a question of deduplicating things. The same thing for variable names. We just collapse everything, made sure they had unique descriptions and label and things like that. So that's mostly what we had to do to produce this data sheet. It took a little bit longer than planned. It ended up being more than 2 or 3 hours. But this is the benefit also to look at your metadata in a more formal way. And so now that we have this meta sheet together, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to generate a SQL script so we can load the data in the database. And we're also going to generate metadata in a format called DDI, which comes from Data Documentation Initiative. And we use that first for the purpose of publishing data in our Rich Data Services platform, but it can also be used for other purposes as it is a global standard. So we'll cover that in the next segment.